The sky wasn't supposed to look like this. Hazy, too bright, too still. And for a moment, I wondered, have we been here before? In the pulse of a wildfire, in the silence before the storm, in the sudden hunger of a field that will not grow, something ancient stirs. Because long before satellites and sirens, there were stories, whispers carved in stone, songs sung to clouds, flames watched not just for heat but for warning. Welcome to Erased Epochs, where we unearth the forgotten and walk the edges of time. Today, you are the explorer. And we are following the trail of 15 ancient cultures, each one trying to tell us the same thing, that the world doesn't end in an instant. It begins with a pattern ignored. So take a breath, let the noise fall away. The past is speaking, and it's speaking of a future we may already be in. The jungle was breathing, thick with humidity, heavy with the scent of orchids in decay. The air clung to my skin as I pushed through the undergrowth. Leaves brushed against my shoulders like fingers trying to hold me back. But then, I saw it. A stela, broken at the crown, but still standing gray limestone laced with moss and veins of red lichen. Birds fell silent as I stepped into the clearing. The stela was ancient, yet something about it felt alive, like it had been waiting. I brushed away the vines, fingers trembling. Glyphs emerged not of kings or wars, but of skies and water. Above all else, a serpent, twisted and emaciated, mouth agape toward an empty sky. Beneath it, a line of people, heads bowed. The Maya called it Chak, the god of rain. But here, he was not blessing, he was retreating. This was no ordinary inscription. This was a warning. It's known among scholars as the Codex of Drought. Though that's not its true name, we don't know what the Maya called it. But we know what it says. It tells of a time the rain stopped. The maize withered. Lakes shrank to mud. Cities emptied. I imagined the sound of crumbling plaster, the silence of abandoned pyramids. The Maya, masters of time, had seen something coming, and they wrote it in stone. Archaeologists believe a series of megadroughts struck the region between 800 and 1000 AD, a slow death that starved the cities of their lifeblood. Entire urban centers, Tikal, Copan, Palenque, fell into ruin. But here's the mystery. The Maya didn't just experience the droughts. They may have predicted them. In temple murals and codices recovered from hidden vaults, recurring symbols appear. Venus descending behind clouds, the cracked sky motif, fire serpents coiled around rivers. Scholars once thought these were myths. Now we suspect they were markers, clues, cycles. The Maya calendar wasn't just a calendar, it was a clockwork of the cosmos. They tracked solar flares, lunar eclipses, rainfall patterns, and sunspot cycles centuries before telescopes. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving books, contains astonishingly accurate eclipse tables and planetary movements. It also contains drought predictions. And yet, for all their knowledge, the rain still failed. Local oral histories fragments passed down in highland villages speak of a curse, of offerings that no longer worked, of gods who stopped listening. Some say the earth itself was offended, too much taken, not enough given back. As I sat at the base of the stela, I ran my hand along a single glyph, worn but visible, 3 dots above a line. It means long time no water. A symbol repeated across other ruins, a motif, or a memory. But the most haunting part? This stela was one of the last erected before the city vanished. It's as if they knew the end was coming, and they left this a monument not to power, but to warning. What if this wasn't just a record of the past, but a message for the future? Because as I stood in that clearing, I noticed something else. The river nearby, the one that once fed this city, had shrunk to a stream. Locals said it hadn't flowed full in years. And when the wind blew, it carried dust. Another cycle? Another forgetting? The Maya wrote of balance between sky and earth, giving and taking. When the balance breaks, the rain leaves. And when the rain leaves, the gods go quiet. I stood, brushing the dirt from my hands. The jungle was still again, watching, waiting, and somewhere beneath its canopy, the next warning sleeps. The silence in the Arctic is different. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of listening. The snow doesn't just lie still, it waits. The trees, frozen in rime, lean inward like elders gathering to remember. And as I stood beneath the green whisper of the aurora, I realized I wasn't alone. Far above the Arctic Circle, on the windswept tundras of Sapmi, the Sami people have lived in rhythm with the land for thousands of years, herding reindeer, following the stars, singing to the earth through joy-haunting melodies that echo across snow and stone, each one a memory carved into air. It was through one of these songs that I first heard the warning. An elder Aku sat by a fire, wrapped in furs dyed with lichen and reindeer blood. Her voice cracked like old ice as she sang. No words, only sound. But in that song, I felt it. Cold that never left. Rivers frozen too long. Winds that howled through hollowed-out valleys, carrying grief. She called it Jiegarakis, the dead breath. A wind that comes before the thaw, but not the one that brings spring. No, this wind comes when the balance breaks, when ice retreats too early and the herds lose their path, when insects hatch too soon and the chicks starve waiting, a warmth that doesn't give, only takes. And it has come before. In Sami drum traditions, ancient shamanic tools painted with ochre and ash, there are symbols that don't match any known constellations. A spiral within a spiral, ringed with spears and snowflakes. Some believe it's a vision of the sky itself unraveling. One drum, hidden for generations, bears a symbol like a sun with jagged rays sinking into a horizon of teeth. Scholars thought it represented a solar deity, but Aku said it wasn't a god. It was the sun going mad. She told me of a winter when the stars turned red, when the aurora came every night, pulsing, violent. The reindeer calves were born sick. The snow melted too fast, then froze again hard as stone. That year, the joiks were only sung at night, and only in mourning. No one had recorded it. No data, no satellite, just memory. Wrapped in song. And yet, scientists recently uncovered evidence of a sudden warming event in the high north, dating back centuries. Ice cores drilled deep into Greenland show abrupt rises in temperature, methane spikes. Frozen layers that should not be broken, cracked open. It aligns with the stories. The Sami don't speak of apocalypse. They don't believe in endings, only imbalance, and the return that follows. But they say the land speaks louder now, the winds come out of season. The herds wander differently. The old joiks don't match the new rhythms. As I walked along the ridges, the snow crunching underfoot, I found a row of standing stones, small, weathered, carved with spirals. No names, no gods, just spirals. The wind moved through them like a flute, and in that moment, I heard the song again, Aku's voice, echoing across the frozen air, a warning. Not in words, but in the ache it left behind. The Sami believe the land remembers, and when we forget, it sings louder. Here, in the kingdom of cold, prophecy doesn't come from books. It rides the wind, it clings to frost, it waits in the cracks of ice that should never melt, but now do. Another echo, another clue, and always another question. The waves were black under moonlight, not with pollution, not with shadow, but with depth, with age, as if the sea itself remembered something it could never quite say. I stood at the cliff's edge on the coast of Santorini, where wind pulls at the bones and the rock still smells faintly of fire. Below me, a caldera, silent now, but once it roared. Atlantis. The name stirs the imagination like few others. A city lost, a civilization drowned, a golden age swallowed whole. But what most forget is this. The story of Atlantis didn't begin with fantasy. It began as a warning. Plato tells us the tale through the voice of Critias, a man recounting an ancient Egyptian scroll preserved from a time before the Great Flood. The Atlanteans, he said, grew powerful and arrogant. They drained wetlands, redirected rivers, carved vast plains into fields, and dug deep for metals and wealth. And then the earth shook. In a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis was devoured by the sea. Fire from the sky, water from beneath. The land torn asunder, not as punishment from gods, but as a consequence of imbalance. Many dismissed it as allegory, a philosopher's myth. But standing here, atop the fractured islands of the Aegean, it's hard not to feel something deeper. Santorini, ancient Thera, was once whole, a ring-shaped island with a thriving Minoan city at its heart. Then, around 1600 BCE, the earth opened. One of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history tore the island apart. Ash blanketed the sky, tsunamis struck distant shores. The Minoans, master seafarers, vanished not long after. Could this have been Atlantis? Geologists found a layer of ash buried deep beneath the sea, meters thick. In it, olive branches, carbon dated to the very window of Plato's tale. The eruption's effects were global. Tree rings in China narrowed, crops in Egypt failed, and the sky went dark. But there's more. In the ruins of Akrotiri, a Minoan settlement preserved in volcanic ash, murals survive vibrant even now. One shows a city of concentric circles, bridges, and canals. Another depicts the sea turning red and a wave overtaking a mountaintop temple. No inscriptions, no names, just images, memories, caught in pigment. Standing in that museum, I felt like I was staring into a memory someone was trying to forget, or trying to warn us about. Because Plato ends his account not with salvation, but with silence. Atlantis disappears. No survivors, no aftermath, just sea. And yet, echoes of this destruction ripple across cultures. The Aztecs speak of a sunken city. The Dogon recall a continent swallowed by water. Tamil texts mention Kumari Kandam, lost beneath the Indian Ocean. Different names, but always the same story: imbalance, arrogance, and water that comes not as gift, but as reckoning. What if Atlantis wasn't a place? What if it was a cycle, a pattern encoded in myth, dressed as story so we would remember? As I left the cliffs of Santorini, the wind picked up, dry, scouring. It carried a scent I couldn't place, not sulfur, something older, something scorched and deep. And in the distance, lightning flickered across the open sea. Perhaps Atlantis didn't vanish. Perhaps it waits. Beneath the waves, beneath memory, a fire sleeping in the ocean's heart, waiting to speak again. The desert doesn't echo, it absorbs. Sound is swallowed in the vast mesas, where red dust gathers like ancient ash and the sky stretches unbroken from horizon to soul. I had come to the Hopi mesas not to find ruins, but something stranger. Something still living. A prophecy. They call it the blue star Kachina, a sign, a celestial harbinger that, when seen dancing in the sky, marks the beginning of the end, the time of purification, not destruction, not apocalypse. But correction. I was led by a guide named Loma, silent, weathered, with eyes that had seen more than he would ever say. He took me to an outcrop above the second mesa. From there, the earth fell away in every direction. Sky above, stone below, the bones of time itself. This is where we watch, he said, not with our eyes, with memory. The Hopi people have guarded their prophecies for generations, not written in books, but sung, painted, and danced. They speak of cycles, of worlds that rise, fall, and rise again. This is the fourth world, they say. 3 have already ended, each by imbalance. 1 by fire, 1 by ice, 1 by flood. And each time, The Earth gave warning. Among the most enigmatic of these warnings is the blue star. When it appears, they say, it will mark the moment the final changes begin, the great shaking, the great dying, and finally, the great renewal. Skeptics scoff. A blue star in the sky? They call it metaphor, folklore. But Loma disagreed. He pointed to a petroglyph carved into desert varnish on a sheer cliff face. It showed a star with rays, one side flared, the other falling. Beneath it, stick figures running, others praying. And at the edge, a spiral. The spiral, he said, is the path we've taken too far. Modern interpretations have tried to tie the blue star to supernovae, comets, or planetary alignments. Some even suggest it may reference the appearance of a star like Betelgeuse predicted to explode in the distant future. Others think it refers to the launch of man-made satellites or the stationing of weapons in orbit. But Loma spoke of none of that. He said the star isn't a thing, it's a moment, when the Earth no longer recognizes us. In recent years, wildfires have scorched the American Southwest more fiercely than ever. Rivers run dry, sacred springs vanish. Even the migration paths of birds and insects so critical to Hopi planting have changed. And yet, the ceremonies continue. At dawn, I watched the dancers move, masked, robed, silent. Their feet stirred the dust into spirals. I felt something stir beneath the earth, something old and rhythmic. And in their steps, I saw the same star again woven into the sashes, painted on drums. The blue star is everywhere and nowhere. The Hopi do not speak of fear, they speak of readiness. When the blue star dances, they say, the fifth world will begin, not through conquest, but through remembrance. Not through power, but balance. And that may be the deepest truth. Because while the prophecy speaks of skyfire and earthquakes, it also speaks of choice. The turning doesn't have to be collapse. It can be return. Return to rhythm. Return to reciprocity. Return to the quiet knowledge that we do not own the earth, we are of it. As I left the mesa, the wind lifted red dust across the road. In the silence, I looked skyward. And for a moment, I thought I saw something move. Not a star, not a comet, a memory. The manuscript was brittle, its pages blackened at the edges, its script faded like breath on cold glass. It rested in a locked cabinet beneath a university archive in Madurai, India. Most walked past it without a glance. But I opened it, and the ocean came rushing in. It spoke of a landmass south of India, vast, green, ancient, stretching beyond the visible map, now buried under the waves. The name it gave was Kumari Kandam, a lost continent, a motherland of languages and stars. The words were Tamil, older than the temples outside the walls, but the warning that felt timeless. It spoke of 3 Sangams, ancient Tamil academies, like cities of poets and scientists. The first 2, it said, were swallowed by the sea, not in metaphor but in thunder. The skies turned dark, the winds reversed, and then came the water high and endless. The cities sang their final verses into the rising tide. It wasn't myth, it was memory. Most historians call Kumari Kandam a legend, a cultural echo of Lemuria, a 19th century scientific hypothesis that posited a sunken land bridge to explain similarities between Tamil and Malagasy languages. But the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. Off the southern coast of India, in the Gulf of Mannar, fishermen have long spoken of stone buildings beneath the sea. They say their nets sometimes catch sculptures, bricks, even coins. In 2002, sonar scans revealed geometric structures off the coast of Pumpahar, arranged like city blocks. Buried beneath silt, drowned in silence. Ancient Tamil texts describe Puhar, the port city, as the jewel of the Chola dynasty, but they also tell of its end, a sudden sea surge that erased it in a single day. One poet wrote, "The waves came at night, and in the morning, there was no laughter." Was this poetic tragedy, or eyewitness account. The manuscript I held didn't just mourn a city. It warned of cycles, a pattern of rise and submersion. When the monsoons changed, when the sun lingered too long above, when the animals moved inland, then came the rains, the flood, the salt, and then silence. Geologists have since discovered evidence of ancient river channels under the Indian Ocean, suggesting massive land loss over millennia, likely due to rising seas following the last ice age. Some even connect it with global flood myths, a cultural trauma remembered worldwide. But here's the difference. The Tamil text didn't plead for rescue. It pleaded for balance. It spoke of Udan Pirapu, a concept of living in shared rhythm with land, sea, and spirit. The Sangams, it said, fell not just because of water, but because their harmony faltered. The land rose in protest. The sea responded. I traced the last line of the manuscript with my finger. The ink had almost vanished, but the meaning remained. We built walls too high and forgot the tide. Out along the coast, I walked the beach near Nagapattinam. The sun was low, the tide was rising, and in the hush between waves, I imagined the sound of drums fading beneath foam. Locals pointed to the horizon and said, "That's where the old cities sleep." And I believed them, because the earth doesn't erase without reason. It remembers, and sometimes it reclaims. There are places where the stars feel closer, not in distance, but in memory. High in the Bandiagara escarpment of Mali, where sandstone cliffs rise like broken teeth from the earth, the Dogon people live in stone dwellings carved into the rock. No neon, no noise, just wind, sky, and time. I arrived at twilight. The horizon bled into purple, and the first stars pierced through the darkening sky like eyes slowly opening. My guide, Yene, said the Dogon don't just observe the heavens, they remember them. And they remember what came before the silence. The Dogon cosmology is one of the most intricate in the world. It speaks of Nomo-amphibious sky beings who descended from Sirius, the dog star, long before history. These weren't gods. They were watchers, teachers, and they came with warnings. The most unsettling? That the sky, if disrespected, would rebel. In a cave above the village, I was shown a wall painting, faded but intact. A sun too large, too red, surrounded by figures weeping black tears. Below them, the earth split. Rivers ran upward. Animals fled into the cliffs. It wasn't a vision of the past. It was a prophecy. They call it Sigwibolo, the sky's protest. It begins, they say, when the rains come at the wrong time. When the Sahel dries too early. When lightning splits trees in the dry season. The Nomo warned that the earth and sky are in dialogue, and when humans forget the language of balance, that dialogue becomes a scream. Here's where it deepens. The Dogon knew of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, long before Western astronomers confirmed its existence with telescopes. They described it as dense, white, and the heaviest thing known. This knowledge, recorded in the 1,930 seconds, shocked anthropologists. How did they know? Some believe the Namo gave it to them. Others think the Dogon inherited it from a civilization, now forgotten one that tracked the sky not with metal, but with memory. But the real secret may not lie in what they knew, but in what they feared. Dogon rituals today still revolve around correcting imbalance. They time their festivals not just to agricultural cycles, but to celestial alignments. A 3-month-long Sigwi ceremony, held every 60 years, is said to recalibrate the relationship between earth and sky to remind the universe that we are listening. But lately, the rhythms have changed. The rains no longer arrive on cue. The Harmattan winds blow stronger, dust chokes the millet fields. And during our visit, elders gathered in silence as a bird once considered a good omen was found dead on the stone steps of the shrine. It had drowned in air. Yene told me, the sky is angry. When I asked him what the Dogon would do, he replied, we sing the old names, even when no one listens. Because when the sky forgets us, we must not forget it. That night, I climbed the cliff and lay beneath the stars. Sirius burned low in the sky, bright, but pulsing, not steady. The earth beneath me hummed faintly, a vibration in the stone. And I realized, this wasn't just prophecy, it was diagnosis. The Dogon don't speak of the end, they speak of correction, but they've also seen what happens when the signs are ignored. The sky does not forgive. It remembers, and when it rebels, it begins with silence. It's easy to forget that silence can be louder than thunder. Delphi lies nestled in the folds of Mount Parnassus, a cradle of marble and olive trees, where time drips like resin from wounded trunks. The air carries the tang of stone warmed by sun, and further up the slope, a peculiar hush, as if the earth itself is listening. This was once the center of the world. The ancient Greeks believed that here, where two eagles released by Zeus met in flight, the Omphalos, the navel of the earth, was located. And it was here the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi, sat above a chasm in the earth, inhaling vapors that rose from the rock and speaking the words of Apollo. For centuries, kings, generals, and seekers traveled here to ask her questions about war, about fate, about the future. And the earth answered in riddles, in murmurs, in visions born of smoke. But then, it stopped. One brittle winter, the smoke that had curled from the sacred fissure didn't rise. No one knew why. Priests waited. The Pythia descended into the temple, sat upon the tripod, and heard nothing. The earth gave no voice, and the oracle, for the first time in memory, fell silent. The chronicles barely mention it. A footnote, a dry notation in a crumbling scroll. But to those who lived then, it must have felt like being abandoned by the cosmos. The earth had closed its mouth. Modern geology has tried to explain the Delphic phenomenon, suggesting that ethylene gas seeping through fissures caused the trance states of the oracle. They've mapped faults, sniffed soil samples. But no scientific model can explain the silence. Because the deeper mystery isn't the gas. It's the timing. Historical climatologists now point to a series of environmental shifts during the late classical period, changes in rainfall, declining crop yields, and sudden droughts across the Mediterranean basin. Delphi, surrounded by sacred springs, began to dry, and the fissures beneath the temple cooled. No more vapors, no more visions. The oracle didn't go quiet because belief faded. She went quiet because the earth stopped speaking. There's a line in an old Homeric hymn that haunts me still. When Apollo turns away, even the stones weep. And as I stood in the ruins of the temple, looking down into the broken chamber where the Pythia once breathed the breath of the earth, I wondered, what did she see in those last moments? What final vision rose from the dark before the silence descended? Perhaps she saw more than politics and empires. Perhaps she saw fire in the sky, or rivers that forgot their paths, or cities cracking beneath their own weight. Perhaps she saw us. The Greeks believed prophecy was never linear. It came in spirals, circles, echoes. You didn't escape fate, you remembered it. And maybe that's what this was. Not a failed vision, a fulfilled one. Because now, again, the fissures of the earth rumble. The skies grow strange. And the air, once filled with voices, grows thick with waiting. As I stepped away from the temple, the wind rose sudden and cool. Olive branches clattered like bones, and for the briefest moment, I smelled something. Not smoke, not fire, but something older. The ghost of a breath. Another question, another silence. The coast of Aotearoa sings with two voices, wind and water. Together, they echo off jagged cliffs and ancient kauri forests, speaking in a rhythm older than language. I followed that sound inland, to a place where the ground tells stories, not in words, but in scars. There, in the Waikato region of New Zealand's North Island, I stood in a broad, bowl-shaped depression. From above, it looked like the earth had been struck by a giant's fist. Locals call it tapapa. In Maori tradition, it's sacred and dangerous, because long ago, the stars fell here. In the oral histories of the Maori, the whakapapa of earth and sky, there's a tale passed quietly among elders. It speaks of Ranganui, the Sky Father, and Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother, being torn apart and the world plunged into chaos. But within this great cosmology is a lesser-known story of fire from above. It begins with birds falling silent, then a trembling in the earth, and then Ga Wetu Hinga, the falling stars. They did not twinkle, they screamed. Ancient chants describe a night when the sky wept flame and the forest bled smoke. Trees burned from the top down, rivers ran thick and red. It was not a metaphor. It was a record encoded in metaphor so it could survive. And beneath that tale is evidence. In 2003, a team of geologists uncovered microspherules in the soil near Tapapa. Tiny glassy beads formed when rock is flash melted by extreme heat, usually from an extraterrestrial impact or atmospheric explosion. Alongside them, layers of charcoal, trees, incinerated almost instantly. This wasn't a campfire gone rogue. It was an airburst. A cosmic explosion above the canopy, hotter than the surface of the sun, leaving no crater but searing everything below. And the timing? Roughly 700 years ago. Exactly when the Maori say the land tore open and the seasons changed. But the most haunting part of the story isn't the fire. It's what followed. The legends say the sun did not return as it should, that days were dim, crops failed, birds vanished, and when the rains came, they were wrong, salty, acrid, like the ocean had turned to smoke. Climate records extracted from bogs and lake beds across Aotearoa show sudden spikes in ash and carbon during this same period. A darkening, a cooling. Some ecosystems never fully recovered. One elder told me, "We call it the time when even the trees had to remember." There's a place near Lake Taupo where petrified forests still stand, trees that died in fire but refused to fall. I walked among them at dusk, the light slanting gold through black trunks. The air smelled of damp soil and something metallic. In that quiet, the past pressed close. Because the story of the fire from the sky isn't just a warning. It's a reminder of how quickly balance can be lost and how long it takes to return. The Maori believe in Maori, the life force in all things. When a place is wounded, its Maori dims, but it can heal, with respect, with time, with memory. As the stars emerged overhead, I lay back against the cool stone and looked up. There were no fire trails, no screams, just silence and shimmer. But the earth beneath me still remembered, and in the stillness, I understood. Some stars fall to punish, others fall to warn. The sun in southern Iraq is not just hot, it's ancient. It doesn't burn, it judges. It looks down on the plains of ancient Sumer like a god who's seen too much and said too little. I walked along the dried bed of the Euphrates, where reeds once whispered beside palaces of baked clay, and tried to hear what the dust was trying to say. I found the tablet half buried in soil the color of old bone. Its cuneiform was sharp, unweathered as if the scribe had carved it yesterday, not 4,000 years ago. The translation was simple. Bleak. The gods have turned away. The sky is closed. No date, no name, just drought, etched into clay. Sumer, the first civilization, builders of ziggurats, makers of the wheel, inventors of writing itself. And yet, for all their brilliance, they could not hold back the sky. Around 2200 BCE, a great drought swept across the Fertile Crescent. Rivers shrank, crops failed, cities collapsed. But here's the thing. The Sumerians saw it coming. Across multiple tablets in Lagash, Nipper scholars have found strange records, sudden price spikes in grain, prayers begging for water, omens in the stars. One king wrote, "The gods grow silent, the rains do not know their place, and beneath the sky, the earth cracked." Satellite imaging has revealed ancient canal systems now filled with dust. Entire towns once linked by water became islands of thirst. The famed city of Akkad, whose empire stretched across Mesopotamia, vanished within a generation. No enemy came, only the wind. But the Sumerians didn't just record the weather. They tried to understand it. The Enuma, Anu, and Lil, their astronomical and divinatory text, mapped omens from cloud shapes, eclipses, even the movement of Venus. And within it, a recurring symbol, the Shamash, the sun growing too strong too soon. Modern climate data, pulled from sediment cores, confirms a rapid and severe aridification event around this time, a shift in monsoon patterns, a weakening of river sources. What had been a land of abundance became a furnace. And so, the gods were blamed. But perhaps the gods weren't silent. Perhaps they spoke in the only way they could. The priest kings of Sumer performed rituals to coax back the rains. They sacrificed oxen, poured libations, burned incense, but the drought persisted, and the people walked away. Villages were abandoned. Cities fell to dust. I stood in the ruins of Eridu, one of Sumer's earliest cities. The wind kicked sand across broken walls. It felt less like collapse, and more like surrender, like the earth had whispered, "Enough." One final tablet, sealed in bitumen, lay near what had been a temple. It read, "We have eaten the stores. We have drunk the last of the river. The god of storms does not answer." And then, a strange line. We turned to the sky, and it was dust. Not fire, not flood, dust. So often, we imagine the end as fire or rising tides. But sometimes, the end is a whisper of sand beneath a relentless Sunday. The Sumerians gave us writing, cities, calendars, and they also gave us a question. What happens when knowledge outpaces humility? As I left the ruins, the sky above was cloudless. The horizon shimmered, but no water lay ahead. Just dust, and the sound of a civilization trying to be remembered. The wind in Scandinavia doesn't whisper, it howls. It moves like memory across frozen fjords and black forests, dragging old names through the snow. I had come to the edge of the Norse world, the ancient settlements of Jämtland, in central Sweden, where sagas were once spoken by firelight, and prophecy traveled on breath turned to frost. The tale that drew me here was not of heroes. It was of an ending. Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. The Norse myths describe it as a relentless season, 3 winters, back to back, without a summer between them. A time when snow buries the crops, sun hides behind clouds, and wolves walk in daylight. It is not just weather, it is a breaking. A signal that Ragnarok, the final reckoning of gods and men, is near. But this myth may be more than myth. In 536 AD, a shadow fell over the northern hemisphere. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote, "The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon." Across Europe and Asia, crop failures were recorded. Summer never truly arrived. The cold clung on. Ice cores from Greenland confirm it. A massive volcanic eruption, or possibly 2, in rapid succession, had thrown ash and sulfur into the stratosphere. Sunlight dimmed, temperatures plummeted. It was the coldest decade in the last 2,000 years. Some believe this was the real Fimbulwinter. In Norse tradition, myth was not always meant to be read literally. It was metaphor, braided with memory, a way to encode trauma into story so it could be passed down across generations. And when I listened to the sagas in that cold wind, I didn't hear fantasy. I heard survival. The poetic Edda, compiled centuries later, contains verses that echo environmental catastrophe. Brothers will fight and kill each other. Sisters' children will defile kinship. It is harsh in the world, whoredom rife. An axe age, a sword age, a wind age, a wolf age, before the world ends in fire. What begins in ice, ends in flame. As I stood among the remains of an old Viking longhouse, its stone hearth cracked and opened to the sky, I felt the weight of that in-between time when the cold has starved the fields and hope hasn't yet bloomed. Across Scandinavia, archaeologists have uncovered signs of abrupt abandonment during this period. Farmsteads left mid-use, tools buried in haste, entire communities vanished into the frost. And in burial mounds, strange offerings, seeds, burned animals, twisted iron, appeasements, prayers, desperation carved in soil. But even more haunting were the runestones erected decades after the darkness lifted. One in Östergötland reads, "He died during the long winter. No date, no name, just winter." Not all stories are told in words. The Norse believed the world tree, Yggdrasil, would tremble before the final battle, that even the gods would fall. But then, after fire and ash, a new world would rise. Green, cleansed, remembered. And that is the final turn of Fimbulwinter. Not just an end, a reset. I left that valley with snow crunching beneath my boots. The aurora danced faintly above the horizon, soft green light over a world that had once nearly vanished beneath white. In the silence, I imagined that winter, not just cold, but without meaning. When the sun is gone, and stories are all that's left. And I wondered, if we had to start again, what stories would we leave behind? The outback doesn't hum, it vibrates. Red soil stretches to the horizon, broken only by ancient ghost gums and the whisper of spinifex in dry wind. Above, the sky presses down like the lid of an urn. I was standing in the heart of Australia, where silence is sacred and every hill, every rock, every shadow remembers. This is where the dreaming lives. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the dreaming is not a myth or a story, it's a living blueprint, a spiritual map, a system older than time. It describes how the world was sung into being by ancestral beings, whose footsteps became rivers, whose breath became wind, whose laughter shaped the stars. And in that map is fire. I was guided by an elder named Kuraka, whose eyes flicked toward the sun as if gauging more than heat. He spoke of fire dreaming, a story passed from elder to child, not in words, but in rhythm, in songlines. Trails of melody that crisscross the continent, anchoring memory to landscape. "We used to walk with the fire," he said. "Now it runs from us." For tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal cultures used cool burns, controlled, seasonal fires to manage the land, to renew it. Fire was medicine, not menace. The flame was a living spirit, treated with respect, never unleashed without permission. But now, the fire walks alone. In recent decades, Australia has seen a terrifying increase in bushfires, hotter, faster, more unpredictable. The Black Summer fires of 2019-2020 burned over 24 million hectares. Entire ecosystems were erased. Skies turned blood orange. Smoke reached as far as South America. Kuraka shook his head. "The fire is angry," he said, "because the land is confused." He took me to a sacred site, a basalt plateau dotted with rock carvings, emu tracks, water holes, fire spirals. One spiral was blackened at the edges, singed by a blaze that passed through just weeks before. "This one," he said, touching the char, "is not part of the song." The carvings told a story. A great fire serpent, once sleeping beneath the ground, disturbed by footsteps it did not recognize. It rises, coils through dry grasslands, and eats the clouds. The rains vanish. The heat grows teeth. That wasn't myth. That was memory. And a message. Fire is not evil in the dreaming. It is balance. But when the land forgets its own rhythm, when the cycles are broken, when the songs are lost, fire becomes chaos. And it returns, not to cleanse, but to punish. I later met with researchers studying ancient fire regimes. Charcoal layers and core samples show a shift. Where Aboriginal fire practices once left gentle, regular imprints in the soil, modern records reveal chaos, long gaps followed by infernos. Lightning sparked, climate-fueled, untethered from ancestral knowledge. The balance has been disturbed. The land is forgetting itself. As I sat beneath a scorched tree, the bark still smoking in places, I heard a sound faint, like humming. Karaka was singing, not to me, to the ground, a song older than empires. One meant to guide fire, not fight it. It said that when you walk the song lines, you don't need a map. The land sings to you, tells you where to go, what to gather, when to burn, when to wait. But if we stop listening, what else will burn? In Rome, history is stacked layer upon layer, like sediment left behind by time's slow river. You can walk a single street and pass through centuries, from crumbling republics to marble-faced gods to the rust of forgotten emperors. But beneath it all, something slept. The Capitoline Hill, one of the 7 sacred hills of Rome, was once home to a vault, not of gold, not of arms, but of prophecy. Within the temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, sealed in bronze chests, were the Sibylline books. They were not written by Romans. They were entrusted to them. According to legend, a mysterious woman, the Sibyl, came to King Tarquin, offering 9 books of prophecy for a price. When he refused, she burned 3, then 3 more. Finally, he relented, paying the full sum for the last 3. They were preserved in secret, consulted only in crisis. Flood, famine, eclipse, earthquakes, climate, fire. The priests of the Sibylline College interpreted their verses always cryptic, always veiled. The texts never offered direct instruction, only patterns, warnings. And among the verses, scattered across fragments that survived fire and conquest, there are whispers of environmental omens. Fields that yield ash, not grain. A sky that shines too long. Waters rising where no river flows. During the late Roman Republic, these warnings were often dismissed. Scholars argued the Sibylline books had become too abstract, their meanings too symbolic. But symbols hold truth, especially when the earth begins to echo them. In the years leading to Rome's decline, climate shifts were not mere background, they were characters in the fall. Tree ring data shows erratic weather patterns across Europe from the 2nd to 5th centuries CE. Droughts strangled grain supplies, floods destroyed infrastructure, famine destabilized provinces. The Nile failed to rise, the Tiber overflowed, and always, the silence of the gods. One emperor, Marcus Aurelius, recorded in his Meditations, "The earth grieves beneath our feet. What god is displeased, what offering forgotten." During his reign, a mysterious dust veiled the sky for over a year. Crops failed, plagues spread. The Sibylline books were consulted again. The priests returned with this line: "When the sun is shamed, the earth must be made clean." No one knew what it meant, but they sacrificed 100 animals. It didn't help. Eventually, the original Sibylline books were lost, either burned in a temple fire or stolen in a siege. But fragments remained, copied by scribes, hidden in monasteries. Preserved not as scripture, but as riddles. And here's where it chills the bone. In the Oracula Sibyllina, later compiled from various Greek sources claiming descent from the original texts, there is a prophecy that reads, "The fire shall rise from the sea, the sun shall grow weary of shining, and men shall drink smoke from the sky." Some call it poetic doomsaying. Others hear something else. Modern scholars have connected this with volcanic eruptions, underwater quakes, the veil of ash that turned the skies dark in 536 AD, that same echo we heard in the Norse Fimbulwinter. Another spiral, another sign. Standing among the ruins of the Capitoline Temple, I imagined those bronze chests, locked and waiting, not filled with fear, but with the weight of knowing. Because the Sibyl never predicted endings. She warned of unbalance. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell in fragments, and the earth, tired of being ignored, turned its voice into silence, into flood, into flame. We always think prophecy is about seeing the future, but sometimes it's about remembering what we were already told. The descent began in silence. Ropes hissed through harnesses. The light above shrank to a halo, and the limestone walls pulled in tight like the throat of the earth itself. I was dropping into the Cave of Swallows, a vertical abyss in the Huasteca region of Mexico, one of the deepest freefall caverns in the world. But I wasn't here for the thrill. I was listening for echoes. The Totonac people, whose ancestors once lived in these highlands, speak of the cave not as a geological feature, but as a mouth, the voice of Tlaloc, the rainbringer. Not a god to be worshipped blindly, but a force to be respected and feared. Because when Tlaloc stopped answering, everything else stopped too. At the bottom of the cave, where light barely touches stone, I found them petroglyphs carved deep into damp walls. Spirals, eyes, serpents with open jaws. And, most haunting, a row of humanoid figures lifting their arms skyward, their heads bowed beneath a jagged, broken line. A sky that would not open. According to local legend, the cave was once the place where rain was cold. Priests would descend during drought years, bringing offerings, feathers, jade, even blood. They would chant, echoing their voices upward through the chamber, hoping the earth would carry their plea into the clouds. Sometimes the rain came. Sometimes it didn't. Modern climatologists examining tree ring data in this region confirm severe, prolonged droughts between 900 and 1100 CE, aligning eerily with periods of political collapse and migration across Mesoamerica. Entire cities, including the powerful ceremonial centers of El Tajin, fell silent. The skies had changed, and so had the cave. Locals say that at a certain time of year, the echo inside the Cave of Swallows shifts. Instead of bouncing cleanly off the walls, it wobbles like something's waiting at the bottom, listening or answering. I clapped once. The sound returned, warped, not delayed, bent, as if it had passed through water. And yet the cave was dry, too dry. The moss that once blanketed the rocks was patchy now. The groundwater, once steady, had slowed to a trickle. Even the swallows for whom the cave is named are fewer now. They no longer spin in vast spirals at dawn. Just a handful, wings slicing empty air. As I climbed back to the rim, sweat mixing with cave dust, I asked a local elder what had happened. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the edge of the cave, looked down into its darkness, and said, "When we stopped asking with respect, the rain stopped listening." It wasn't about ceremony. It was about relationship. Tlaloc, or whatever force lives beneath that name, isn't just rain. He's a cycle, a dialogue between sky and soil. When the land is clear, the water comes. When it's wounded, the cave stays quiet. And now, it's very quiet. Scientists are studying the cave for microclimatic shifts, humidity changes, nesting patterns, mineral leaching. But no algorithm can explain the feeling of being down there. The pressure, the sense that you've stepped into a lung holding its breath, waiting. As dusk fell, I watched storm clouds gather on the horizon. They stayed there, hung motionless, like a withheld answer. The rain didn't come, but the memory did. Echoes rising from a place where people once called the sky by name, and the sky sometimes answered. It was not the cold that startled me. It was the light. Thin, gray, like the sun had been washed in ash water and hung low behind veils of mourning. I stood in the north of England, on the edge of Chillingham Forest, where ancient oaks remember things no scroll ever recorded. And in 536 AD, the sky bled. The account comes from a monk name unknown who scratched a line into the margin of a gospel manuscript, barely a sentence, almost casual. This year, The sun gave no light, and the crops failed. But that one line is echoed across continents. In the Eastern Roman Empire, Procopius noted, "The sun shone like the moon, without rays, as if in eclipse, for nearly a year." In China, snow fell in summer. In Peru, tree rings show arrested growth. Across the globe, something terrible moved through the sky. And it began with silence. Scientists now believe a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, possibly from Iceland or the tropics, launched sulfur and ash into the stratosphere, dimming the sun and triggering what's known as the late antique Little Ice Age. But to the people of Chillingham, it was simpler. The sky had turned against them. Local folklore, preserved in old church carvings and whispered tales, speaks of the black summer when dawn never quite arrived, and birds did not sing, crops withered, livestock miscarried, wells turned foul, and then the sky bled red. I visited the remains of a small stone chapel tucked into the woods. The roof was long gone, and moss clung to the altar like a blanket for forgotten faith. Behind the altar, carved into damp stone, was an image not found in any scripture. A robed figure, cloaked in fire, eyes turned upward. Above them, a sun cracked and leaking flame. Some say it was a saint's vision. Others believe it was a memory. In medieval weather chronicles, the year 536 is the beginning of what some historians call the worst year to be alive. The cooling led to famine. Famine fed plague. And by 541, the Justinian plague had begun to sweep through the Mediterranean, the first pandemic in recorded history. But in Chillingham, they didn't speak of pandemics. They spoke of curses and of trees that refused to bloom. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, confirms it. Growth rings in oaks and pines around Northumbria show abrupt stunting, not for a month, for years. Even now, some of the oldest trees here show scars, bark twisted, cores blackened as if burned from within. As I touched one, my fingers came away dusty. The forest still remembers. Walking deeper, I found a standing stone barely visible beneath bracken. Not Roman, not Celtic, something older. A single groove spiraled down its face like a tear etched in stone. I sat there for hours. No birds called. No breeze stirred. The world, again, felt paused. It's easy to think of climate catastrophe as modern, something distant, but the earth has always spoken, in cold, in heat, in ash. And we, for all our brilliance, have always been caught by surprise. The people of Chillingham didn't have science. They had stories. And those stories say this: the sun will return, but never unchanged. And when it does, remember, because even light can forget how to shine. In the deserts of Iran, fire is not destruction, it is divinity. I stood before an eternal flame at the Atash Barum, a fire temple believed to have kept its blaze alight for over 1,500 years. It flickered without wind, fed by sacred wood, tended with devotion. To the followers of Zoroaster, fire is the breath of truth. But in his oldest verses, fire also brings warning. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's most ancient monotheistic faiths, sees existence as a battle between order, Asha, and chaos, Rouge, light against shadow, heat against stillness. But the balance is fragile, and when disrupted, fire becomes something else. The Avesta, their sacred text, contains cryptic prophecies known as the Frashokerati, the final renovation of the world. But before that rebirth comes a reckoning. One line reads, "When the frozen flame touches man's breath, the metal of the mountains shall run like water, and the sky shall hold no season." I first read it in a crumbling translation, hand-copied in Yazd. The phrase haunted me. Frozen flame. At first, it made no sense. But then, I saw it. Not in a temple, but in a glacier. On the slopes of Mount Damavand, the sacred peak of Persian myth, scientists have documented the rapid retreat of ice. The meltwater carries traces of heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, toxins released from ancient rocks now exposed for the first time in millennia. The mountain bleeds. The air grows hotter. The ground burns drier. But in the high passes, frost still lingers until it breaks. And when it breaks, it floods. A contradiction. A paradox. A frozen flame. Zoroaster warned that near the end of the age, NASA's spiritual pollution would rise not from evil acts alone, but from imbalance. The earth would become weary, the elements would protest. Fire would scorch where it should warm. Water would retreat where it should nourish. And then, the test of metal. According to tradition, at the end of time, molten metal will flow across the earth like a river. The righteous will walk through it unharmed. The impure will be scalded, not as punishment, but as purification. And yet, as temperatures rise and permafrost thaws, metal is flowing. From Arctic minefields, from collapsing mountain veins, into rivers, into lungs. Not metaphor. Reality. I sat beside the sacred fire that night, its glow painting my skin in amber. An old priest placed another log on the coals and said softly, "This fire will never harm you unless it forgets who it is." I thought of wildfires roaring through parched hills, of heat domes choking cities, of solar brilliance turned unbearable. And I wondered, have we made the fire forget? The prophecy ends not in despair, but in renewal. Zoroaster taught that even chaos can be returned to balance. That flame, once realigned with purpose, becomes medicine again. But first comes the test. The frozen flame. The poisoned mountain. The sky without season. When I left the temple, dawn had broken. The sun rose through desert haze, a disk too bright, too pale, like the eye of something just awakened. It did not feel warm. It felt watchful. Another echo, another warning, and perhaps one last chance. The wind has changed. I feel it in the dust that clings to my boots, in the scent of ash carried from distant hills. In the quiet way, the trees seem to lean toward each other like they're listening for something we've forgotten how to hear. 15 fragments. 15 places where memory was left behind, not in ink, but in stone, in song, in silence. They came from deserts and ice fields, jungles and mountains, oceans and fire. Yet all spoke the same language, not of fear, but of balance. Not of punishment, but of patterns. The Maya, the Sami, the Hopi, the Dogon, the Maori, they didn't just describe disaster. They described cycles, warnings, choices. And most haunting of all, they described us. Each prophecy echoed the same truth. When we forget our place in the world remembers for us. I have walked beneath skies that should not have been clear. I have stood beside rivers that no longer flow. I have pressed my hand to carvings left by people who saw what was coming and left a message anyway. And though the names change, Tlaloc, Tiamat, Nomo, the fire serpent, the blue star, the voice is always the same. A whisper rising through time. A breath held for centuries. A question, still waiting to be answered. It is tempting to think we are different, that satellites and spreadsheets and steel will shield us from the turning of the age. But the ancients would tell you this: the earth doesn't care if you understand it, only that you respect it. So now, we stand where they once stood, at the edge of a change. Another fire, another flood, another silence, but also another chance. Because if I've learned anything on this path, it's this. History doesn't whisper, it waits.